But the fact is, you can play Charlie XCX on the radio. But if if you put Björk on the radio, people would be like...
I'll put Björk on the radio, but it's just me in the car.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cannes Canon, where we look back at Cannes competition filmmakers' films to get a better idea of their oeuvre.
So the next filmmaker I'll be talking about is Kleber Mendonça Filho, the great Brazilian auteur. Now, when we talk about Kleber Mendonça Filho, we have to talk about the cinephile director. We have a lot of filmmakers who make films because they are artists at the core and they have to express something, and the camera just happens to be the paintbrush that they create their art with. And there's other filmmakers who become filmmakers because of a deep love of the art form, an obsession with cinema. And those are filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino, or Wim Wenders is another one. And Kleber Mendonça Filho is a very unique one in this way, because not only is he a filmmaker, he began his career as a film critic, as a journalist, as someone who, through the 90s and 2000s, ran his own movie blog, talking about movies just on the internet. And now here he is, for the third time in the Cannes competition. In his documentary, Pictures of Ghosts, which came out in 2023, he talks a lot about his upbringing and the way that cinema informed so much of his life and led him to becoming the filmmaker that he is. And how his city, how Recife really ingrained this deep love of the movie palace and of the filmmaking form in him. And after about a decade and a half of making short films, he made his jump over to feature-length narrative films with Neighboring Sounds, which released in 2012, premiering at the Rotterdam Film Festival. Now, despite quite a small premiere, this film went on to quite immense success. And from there, his career really just snowballed and continued growing and growing, with his first selection in the Cannes competition in 2016 for Aquarius, his jury prize that came from Bacurau, and now The Secret Agent. I think he has firmly established himself as one of the most interesting and exciting filmmakers coming out of Brazil right now.
Absolutely, and I think he is a necessary voice in the Brazilian landscape. He brings a certain sensibility to what would otherwise be kind of plain, mundane dramas. There's always a certain energy or a certain immediacy, sometimes a little bit of a pulpiness to his stories. I'm thinking to Aquarius, which it is a drama, but it feels at times like it could be this conspiracy thriller of sorts, this revenge thriller even at certain moments. And this kind of pulpiness gives his films a lot of energy, and it makes the viewing experience a lot more dynamic.
Well, and as someone who was raised on a lot of American cinema, he's using a lot of the cliches and expectations that we've gained through American genres. He plays with the ideas and conventions that we expect to see from American films. And it's almost like his work is using these American genres through a very distinctly Brazilian lens. And what he's doing here is looking at the colonization, I would say, and the way that Americans have culturally and militarily fucked up Brazil for decades. And he's reclaiming those genres and making them authentically Brazilian. I mean, he was born in '69, so he is a child of the 70s, a child of the 80s. He went through and grew up during the military dictatorship that was imposed by the Americans. And despite that, he fell in love with movies because of American films. I think it's impossible to separate Mendonça from the expectations of American cinema. We look at Bacurau, which is three separate things at once. It is a Western, it's a horror movie, and it is a grindhouse trash movie. Through this lens of reclaiming it through Brazilian identity and through the idea of these indigenous people who are not only being targeted by the Brazilian government, but are being given by the Brazilian government to American tourists to hunt for sport.
Yeah, and Bacurau goes to the furthest extent that he's ever had so far in his filmography. Whereas like his other films, there are hints of that, but they remain dramas for the most part.
But even then, Neighboring Sounds, it is still taking very American forms, taking from Altman, I think of Shortcuts a lot with it, that it's so many different stories. There's Paul Thomas Anderson that we can see this is taking from. It's that ensemble movie where everyone's in a small space, their stories somewhat intersect. He's also taking elements of the Coppola crime thriller and the sort of generational idea of mafia and generational wealth gathered through less than savory means.
Yeah, and I mean, with the exception of Bacurau, like, this is a filmmaker who isn't just Brazilian. He's from Recife.
Yes.
His films very much care about showing and about utilizing the infrastructure and the geography of Recife, the culture of Recife, the different neighborhoods of Recife and Aquarius. You know, it's about a very specific series of blocks in Recife that is by the sea. You look at Pictures of Ghosts. It's a film about Mendonça Filho's journey through cinema, but also a journey through cinema being in Recife.
Yes, exactly. It's in
and a
3
history
chapters.
of the cinema.
It's about his apartment, it's about the cinemas, and it's about the movies that raised him.
So I think he cares a lot about the geography, the urban geography. Even if Bacurau doesn't take place in Recife, I mean, there's clearly a lot of attention put onto how this town works and how this town is built.
Films put places in maps. You look at the work of Ken Loach, and he makes films in London or Newcastle or Manchester. And so for me, it's very natural to make a film in Recife. It's where I work.
And I think that's one of the key visual strengths of a film like Neighboring Sounds, which maybe utilizes that the most from his filmography, in that you see a very large variety of buildings that distinguishes different class levels, different poverty levels, but also, you know, how apartments are organized. You know, how you're going to open the front door and you're in the kitchen because that's where the maids are, and you have the rest of the 2-story apartment after that.
So many of the Cannes competition filmmakers this year, I think we have a lineup full of homebodies. A lineup full of people whose cinema is so firmly based on being representative of where they're from. We have that with Carlos Simon, we have that with Bigan, we have that with Mendonça Filho. He's making it his own. He's truly making it his own, and he's claiming it for his city.
So let's talk about Neighboring Sounds. How would you summarize Neighboring Sounds?
Oh, well, Neighboring Sounds actually, I think is a very difficult film.
Yeah, that's what I was
There's
thinking.
so much going on. So Neighboring Sounds is a movie set in an apartment block.
It's kind of a gated community.
It's a bit of a gated community, but it's a gated community that has many different levels to it. It's not just all the wealthy people live here. There's some extremely wealthy people that live here, including a man named Francisco, who seems to have come into his wealth in a bit of unsavory means. And at one point, it's implied that he sort of owned the entire neighborhood and potentially had some people doing some pretty shady dealings in his favor. But he's now elderly, and he has a son who's a real estate agent who's trying to boost the value of this little community and is kind of living his own story throughout. And we have many other stories going on here. The real overarching thing that we're getting in Neighboring Sounds is the story of a small security company that has been brought in to look after the community that's doing an absolutely terrible job. And the mystery of why they're there and why they have come into this community is what guides us through the rest of the movie and what a lot of the surprises come from here. But again, this is not a film about plot. It's very much a film about the moments, it's a film about the interactions, and it's a film about the class disparity that we see from story to story.
And it's about how all these threads touch each other, connect with each other, disconnect from each other, that kind of paint this picture of this particular neighborhood, all in an effort of kind of showing certain absurdities of Brazilian class structure and gentrification.
Which is so fascinating that they are able to do this story about gentrification and class struggles all within this one place because it's such a dense setting that everyone's on top of each other, and we are able to see the working class mingling with people like Francisco who are so wealthy, and we're seeing all of this happening at the same time in the same place all at once.
And there's this kind of like looming tension.
Yeah, there's people keying the cars.
If they don't get things their way. Again, you have like tensions between neighbors.
This neighboring sounds of the title, there's always this beautiful soundscape that's being developed here. It's loud, it's noisy, and it's ever present. And that's, I think, what it's kind of saying is that soundscape is the class system in a way. It's inescapable, it's all around us, and it is loud. And you can try to tune it out, but it's always there.
When you have the word sound in your title, you have to live up to it.
Yeah,
and
you better.
I think this film does live up to it.
It definitely does.
It shows,
Soundscape's brilliant.
It evolves throughout the film.
Because there's occasionally these sounds of construction and everything as well that you're just wondering, God, why the hell, it's the middle of the night.
Which kind of contrasts with the visuals, frankly, because the streets look usually pretty empty. When you look at the buildings just as is, you see almost nobody, and they're very like flat, all white buildings or light gray or variations of gray with like a few windows here and there.
Yeah.
It's a
often
little
barred windows too.
As somebody who wasn't familiar with the architecture of Recife, I was a little bit like shocked by this and shocked by the kind of buildings that were being built here.
Yeah.
I almost felt like they were the kind of buildings you would build as a kid in Legos, in the sense that you build to make a building, but you don't think about like
it's incredibly
infrastructure.
Utilitarian.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's got its own look to it.
Yeah.
But it still feels like a giant block of white concrete, you know. And I'm glad that Mendonça Filho kind of stepped back for a second, looked at that, and I was like, yeah, I gotta film this.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it is the apartment block that his parents live in. I mean, the main apartment, the one with sort of the green tiles, his parents have lived there for like his entire life. He made movies as a kid when he was there.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what Pictures of Ghosts is all about.
Having seen Pictures of Ghosts.
Do the Right Thing is another film that's very, very prominent in this, because that's another film about a neighborhood that is alive and that everyone's interacting in the heat. While we see sort of this eruption in Do the Right Thing, here it becomes very personal. And we see sort of why things have been happening the way that they have been happening, all potentially as an act of revenge or premeditated chaos.
Já, eu quero que você vá em casa dar as plantas, tá? Eu volto em meia hora, Nelsinho.
So let's move on to Julia Ducournau. So you might best know Julia Ducournau for her Palme d'Or winning film Titane, but she's been active for a little while now. She's a La Femis graduate, which is the top film school in Paris. The people in that club are like Céline Sciamma, Alice Winocourt, Eskil Vogt, lots of funny how they're kind of the two French body horror girlies right now.
Yeah.
But what really brought her to the spotlight is her first solo directing film, Raw, which was at the 2016 Cannes Critics Week. It wasn't that long ago, but still a female-directed, female-led body horror film that takes into account the female experience was pretty novel at that time, whereas now we're starting to get used to it. And then of course, her second film, Titane, was accepted in the Cannes competition and was famously announced as the Palme d'Or winner a little bit too early by a certain Spike Lee.
The film that won the Palme d'Or is Titane.
Wait!
But either way, this makes her the second woman to ever win the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival. Ducournau has been placed in a bit of a body horror box, usually horror relating to gross or like particularities of the body. So filmmakers like David Cronenberg, of course, are part of the body horror film movement. But she's been kind of in this sub-box of feminist body horror, and that usually is essentially body horror that puts forward women's issues or women's bodies. I think it's maybe slightly reductive in the sense that
Definitely.
her films, they're not necessarily just about feminist issues, quote unquote.
Oh, totally.
Titan for me is a film about body homogeneity and not necessarily about a woman's body, you know? But either way, with just these two films, she's already kind of established herself as like one of the most fascinating voices in horror cinema today.
Well, it's really funny because when I first watched Raw, I hated that movie with my whole stomach. I simply could not see how well done the movie was because I was so viscerally disgusted by it. Anytime I looked at the screen, I was like, I want to throw up right now. I can't watch this. And then after Titan, I went back and revisited Raw, and I was like, oh, this movie kind of absolutely rules, and I still hate it. You know, we saw something like The Substance, which, although disgusting, is still poppy and fun, and it's bright, and it's accessible, whereas Ducournau, with both Titan and Raw, it seems like her goal is to viscerally shock and disgust the audience away from the image.
I mean, some people put them in the same box, but like, they couldn't be more different.
They couldn't be.
It's very much an oversimplification. And it's
Yeah.
Ducournau, the way she builds her stories and the way she conceives of them are already a lot more radical than a very traditional storytelling structure that Farjak puts on the plate.
Just one quick analogy that I'd have is people love both Charlie XCX and Björk, right? But the fact is you can play Charlie XCX on the radio. But if you put Björk on the radio, people would be like...
I'll put Björk on the radio, but it's just me in the car.
Yeah, but these movies are weird, they're uncomfortable, they make me viscerally upset at times.
Raw is probably the film I would consider her most fun film. In that there is like a visceral excitement to the film. The ending is just kind of like a fist pump moment a little bit, like in a dark way. Whereas Titan is like this deep observation at like sentiments and about gender homogeneity, about recreated family, about macho values, and all these kinds of things that I found absolutely fascinating. We can see a couple themes pop up in between them. Themes of bullying or social pressure, coming of age, or the body changing in some way, and looking at gender through a different lens.
The thing that I find so amazing about Julia Ducournau is that her films feel so personal, and even though they occupy a genre space and they wade into very disgusting territory, they are all clearly based on something that is very deep and personal to her. And I think a major part of all of this is dysphoria. In Titan, it's a bit of gender dysphoria as well as human dysphoria, where her body is melding together with metal. In Raw, there's also that dysphoria that comes from, you know, looking in the mirror and wondering who you're becoming and sort of feeling like that's out of control. Or in Mange, that's another film very much about dysphoria, about looking in a mirror and seeing a different image of yourself. That's a recurring theme. There's also themes of familial trauma and the hurts and the pains and the ways that we are that are passed down to us, the nature that overrides the nurture. All of her films do take the internal and they externalize them through the body. And I think all great body horror does this. It manifests in flesh what is felt inside, what is feelings, right? It is the most external way to show the feelings that a character has inside, is by manifesting on their skin, on their body.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what makes her so special. She understands that very feminine nature.
And it's great that she's really already started to hone in on the fact that she already has developed such a strong brand is a compliment, I guess, to her work. I think the only thing that for me might be a little bit of an irritation about her work is that sometimes it feels maybe a little bit too clean. For films that are about what they are, like I think she likes to favor things like, you know, these great little one-ers, composed, very well-lit shots, and they're very pleasing to the eye, but is it completely fitting with the work?
That's the La Femis look, right?
It might be the La Femis look.
Absolutely. Maybe you're onto something that, like, you know, she's not Tsukamoto, the filmmaker behind Tetsuo the Iron Man, whose films like are so raw and visceral. I would say that I think she compensates for that with the abstractness that often comes through in the storytelling. Titan is not an easy film
to understand,
to break into. Even though it looks very clean and polished on the surface, that's a movie that genuinely the first time I watched it, I walked away going, what the fuck? I need to think about this.
Yeah.
I need to think about this a
What
little
did
bit
I
more.
watch? What was this about?
Yeah, what was this
you know?
about? How do I parse this?
Yeah, genre is supposed to be a bit of a box to
Yeah.
a certain extent. Like if you're a genre film, you adhere to codes.
Well, you have
And
to do certain things.
Exactly. And her films are genre in the sense that they procure very specific and strong emotions. They are so much more abstract and like narratively break down
Yeah.
what a genre film should be like.
And what I appreciate about Ducournau is that she is elevating horror. She's doing something new and different without ever sacrificing on what genre fundamentally should be. She's got the buckets of blood and she's got the brain.
But let's talk about a film that isn't nearly as smart, and that is her first film, Mange or
I had
Eat.
fun, man.
In between, I did a TV movie that's called Mange, which was a really strange film, like, man, even for me. I don't see it really connected to the rest that I've done, to be honest. It was a really weird exercise.
Mange is a film about a previously bulimic woman who was, bullied in high school.
What was the name that they gave her? It was like Dick in Her Ass Debbie or something like that. It's something like that.
Yeah.
It's basically like talking about how she was bullied because someone started a rumor.
A baseless rumor that spawned from nowhere, and that essentially had her switch schools, like traumatized a big part of her childhood. And then here we start the film with this character who is in shape, who is maybe even like perhaps slightly skinnier than you might anticipate a normal person to be, until she recognizes a high school classmate at a support group for eating disorders, which kind of re-triggers a lot of these memories and which leads her down a certain relationship with that person.
This is a TV movie. It was co-directed
Yes.
with someone else, so it's clearly not Julia Ducournau's vision entirely. And yet, I do think that a lot of her style comes through in the film. I think that you can see moments and glimmers of what Julia Ducournau would
There are
become.
glimmers of her interest, like her thematic interest, like stylistically, man, it is. I think I don't know all the backstory, like production-wise of this film. I think it was a film that was done very, very quickly. I personally could barely find like the style of Ducournau in that film. I think it was also written very quickly because, wow, that is a messy, unsatisfying script. Even if you were to excuse the film as like, oh, it's taking maybe a different approach at the revenge story, you don't really know exactly what this character is gonna do. And for a film about a rekindling of a relationship with somebody who traumatized you, if the first ending that can pop into your mind as a revenge storyline, well, that's what happens. That's it. That's the end of the movie. Like, who cares? And then on top of that, like, oh my God, is it cheesy and not in a self-aware way film. Like, you got films from her past in high school with a shitty DV filter, her reflection in the mirror talking to her, being like, oh, you're worthless.
Yeah,
like,
it's very after-school special.
and it's very like, here's my first film, I'm a filmmaker, trust me, kind of feeling.
Yeah, no, and I agree with all of that. This is a mess, but I find it really charming in a way. I had fun with it. It was stupid. It did what it said on the box. I do wish that it delved a little bit deeper into some of these ideas. I think that the revenge at the end, I was pretty satisfied with it, but I wish that it was pushed further, that they really got nasty with it, the way that Ducournau has in all films since.
The original way of tackling the story was of not to do a revenge storyline. Because at first, you're not sure what her intentions are, And then it just turns out to be revenge,
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh, well, okay, well, at least it's gonna be a satisfying revenge, right?
It's kind of
And
a lame revenge in the end.
There's a fun threesome scene, but like
Yeah,
other than
followed
that,
by a bunch of junk food, which is...
and it's so weak. It's just like, oh, by the way, like this whole time you didn't recognize me, I was the girl you were bullying. And then she leaves. And that's supposed to be like this big epic moment. I'm like, that's it? That's it?
And
And then of course you get a Friday Nights at Freddy's jump scare to end the film.
Yeah, that's pretty lame. But I see everything you're saying, but there's something so charming in just seeing the roots of this filmmaker and some of the ideas that would eventually be fleshed out a lot more. I had fun with this. It's not a good movie.
I thought it was less charming and more like disillusioning.
Really? I didn't
I
see
thought-
that at
Je
all.
sais pas quoi te dire, j'ai peut-être compté un peu large. Bah, ça dépend. On est combien?
4.
Ah ouais.
Et j'imagine qu'ils sont pas au courant.
Non.
Et qu'après tu vas te
Ouais.
faire. Et qui croient que.
Ouais.
Mais pas que.
Non.
Alors qu'en fait.
Ouais.
Mais non.
Ça se discute.
Je peux utiliser ta salle de bain?
Étage gauche.
Well, that's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed our discussion on these filmmakers. And be sure to check out tomorrow's episode where we'll be talking about the new films from these filmmakers on the Croisette. See you then.